So I think the sustainable development, many of the jargon that we often hear in the recent years, I think I've started realizing more and more the traditional the system is already offering to us. So that is where I started feeling more connected now with this kind of projects. That yes, this is an area that we all need to go through. That is why I force this topic as a historical landscape ecology, because if you look at the Sangam literature, it has got science and it's a literature, but literature has got not, I mean, everything is based on the facts. It's also, some of them is romanticized. So when you look at the Sangam literature, which is written 2000 plus years ago, it has got both a descriptive part and the romantic part. The Sangam literature typically talks about these two. So I will kind of indicate how the contemporary knowledge is kind of, I mean, I would not even say recreation of the past. Probably very partly we are looking at it. In fact, what people have done in the past, probably they have been more complete than what we are now, is what I'm beginning to understand more and more. So again, when we talk about landscape, it's generally, as I said, it's the spatial pattern of elements. I mean, it looks similar. If you go to a mountain, the Himalayan mountain, people can appreciate it. Suppose if people travel, if they go to coast, they know what is a coastal landscape is, because they have its different, it's very unique character. Similarly, if you go to the Western Ghats, you will see certain unique character. So that's kind of, if you can picturize them, it allows us to kind of see what this whole the perception is. That is how it is said, the patterns which is repeated over and over, it provides a perception for people. If you can imagine, okay, this is the landscape, means it has got different character. So if the coastal, means it has got different character. So like that, it keeps happening. So, but then when it comes to defining, how do I define a landscape? People always had a problem. Okay, so they said, oh, it's just based on the land. Okay, let's say I'm taking the Central Indian Islands. So I take this Western Ghats. As a land defined definition is one in which you have several ecosystem embedded in it. So other group of people, they started looking at a landscape definition from a species perspective. Like me being a conservationist, if I want to talk about, say, Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve or Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, and then there are areas surrounding them. Sangam literature, there's been, that it's all written several years ago with several experts. Many of us don't even know who those people were. I mean, many of them are documented, many are still being documented, but there are certain things, the collections are there. Okay. So among the collections, including Tirukural, that many of you know, very familiar with, the Tinagals, Ain Tinagal is one of the literature. It talks about landscapes. It's a Tamil landscapes. Okay. So I don't know, many of you, if you are from Tamil Nadu or reading a Sangam literature, would know they have actually described the landscape so beautifully. It's known as a Tinaigal. Tinaigal is basically landscapes. So the 5 landscapes have been defined. It is written very beautifully. I mean, I'll tell you, the Tinaigal has got 2 descriptions. There is Aham, there is a Puram. Aham is more of the internal, the feelings. It's an expressions about those narratives. The Puram is the description of the landscape. So it has got Aham and Puram, but then overall, if you look at it, there are 5 Tenagals. So like it's generally said, even if you go to any of the schools in Tamil Nadu, this is very well taught. We talk to people, when we talk to policymakers, kind of making the science applied, we generally go back to the old system. So I think the sustainable development, many of the jargon that we often hear in the recent years, I think I've started realizing more and more the traditional the system is already offering to us. So that is where I started feeling more connected now with this kind of projects. That yes, this is an area that we all need to go through. That is why I force this topic as a historical landscape ecology, because if you look at the Sangam literature, it has got science and it's a literature, but literature has got not, I mean, everything is based on the facts. It's also, some of them is romanticized. So when you look at the Sangam literature, which is written 2000 plus years ago, it has got both a descriptive part and the romantic part. The Sangam literature typically talks about these two. So I will kind of indicate how the contemporary knowledge is kind of, I mean, I would not even say recreation of the past. Probably very partly we are looking at it. In fact, what people have done in the past, probably they've been more complete than what we are now, is what I'm beginning to understand more and more. Yeah. So landscape ecology is a science. Okay. Now, anything, everything we talk about problem solving, like be it climate change, be it no, dealing with the pollutions, large scale issues, the scientific underpinning is the landscape ecology. So, but then when you look at science, I just want some of your students, maybe some of you are looking at the new options to explore, because landscape ecology is really a great science that provides the scientific backstopping for management. So if I can just pick up this quote, written 1984 by Reiser, is another famous landscape ecologist. It's not stated to be a separate discipline or a separate ecology as a part of a branch. It's a integrated discipline. That's where the landscape ecology, gained popularity, even though it started with a lot of confusion. So when it was proposed, it's not very long ago. You can see this is the literature is probably the last 20 years. It was more of kind of a people questioning why I need this. There is a macroecology, there is a biogeography, there's also geography, all sorts of things. But then when we look at the literature deeper, so the term itself was not very new. It was stated 1930 from a contemporary literature. But then it started getting into more ecosystem concept 5 years later. But actually the discipline started getting ground in only 1980s, because when the European started looking at land management in a way that you need to have an integrated approach. But I can also tell you later, but it's not exactly what the European school is been kind of advanced now. There's a kind of transformation that has taken place when the Americans started taking over the landscape ecology as a science. So they started looking more from a conservation perspective, whereas European start looking at more integrated perspective. So as I said, the emergence of landscape ecology resulted in confusion and started getting clarity only lately with the focus on ecological research and natural resource management. So it is a study. I mean, people often say it provides a kind of framework for spatially appreciating things. Okay, so we talk about the traditional knowledge system. I mean, it's written, sometime verbally passed on. There are also references. I think this is many of these contemporary ecologists might want to appreciate this. When you read many of the historical literature, even if it is not talked about quantitative, it's a descriptive or romantic, but there is a clear spatial references. Even today, people can actually go back and say, oh, this is written making some reference to some mountain, reference to some river. But if you see it in the contemporary ecological literature, people do a lot of hardcore, quantitative stuff, look at beautiful graphs, produce equations, but it is not spatially referred. So if it is not spatially referred, the application of that becomes very limited. So therefore, the landscape ecology came in to provide the explicit framework which looks at the spatial pattern and ecological process. So that is kind of a cause and effects of the change that happens at the different scales. In the scale could be from small, like even centimeters, even micro, to hundreds of kilometers. So it is kind of taken the kind of the approach looking at different perspectives. And since aerial photography was available, when people talk about landscape, they always looked at a very large scale. So it's kind of easier for people to appreciate when you look at this, the space from a aerial view or satellite view. So if I can say this, landscape ecology is generally combines the spatial approach of the landscape architecture. So if you look at landscape architecture, so people try to look at how things are, where you need to provide and things like that. Okay. So it's a combination of the landscape architecture but then bringing the functional aspect to the ecology. This is how things have evolved. So again, as I said, it's evolved with the broad scale environment issues and development of new scale-related concepts in ecology, and advancements in technology such as satellite imageries, computing power, a lot of opportunity for storages, including the cloud computing, everything else that all started developing because that allowed the landscape ecologists to appreciate the land better and describe better so that it can be managed better. So that is why the landscape ecology science is directly related to land management options that is available, which also indirectly means that so we can use the science to kind of prepare ourselves for conservation management. So again, when we talk about landscape, it's generally, as I said, it's the spatial pattern of elements. I mean, it looks similar. If you go to a mountain, the Himalayan mountain, people can appreciate it. Suppose if people travel, if they go to coast, they know what is a coastal landscape is because they have its different, it's very unique character. Similarly, if you go to the Western Ghats, you will see certain unique character. So that's kind of, if you can picturize them, it allows us to kind of see what this whole and the perception is. That is how it is said, the patterns which is repeated over and over, it provides a perception for people. You can imagine, okay, this is the landscape means it has got different character. So if the coastal means it has got different character. So like that, it keeps happening. So, but then when it comes to defining, how do I define a landscape? People always had a problem. Okay. So they said, oh, it's just based on the land. Okay, let's say I'm taking the Central Indian Islands. So I take this Western Ghats as a land defined definition is one in which you have several ecosystem embedded in it. So other group of people, they started looking at a landscape definition from a species perspective. Like me being a conservationist, if I want to talk about, say, Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve or Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, and then there are areas surrounding them, I can use a tiger as a specific use cases or elephant. So I use a certain umbrella species to kind of refer that landscape. So people have been able to use these two things from a lands perspective and species perspective. So this is how we evolve. Even the confusion still exists with among many people. How do we call a place a landscape? Yeah, it's a term that's been used very often now. Maybe from even landscape architects are using, and also ecologists are using, conservationists are using. Now policymakers started talking about landscape approach to problem solving issues. Okay, so looking at top-down kind of perception and then start looking at how things are arranged at the lower strata. So, but then there is no fixed boundary to a landscape. It is defined based on certain criteria. So that is how I just explained. There are two major groups that you can actually consider, the land-centric and species-centric. So in land-centric, basically what it means is you have the opportunity to visualize the issues at a really, really large scale. It's unprecedented scale that you can look at. It can be a global scale, it could be a continental scale, it could be a national scale, it could be anything. So it's defined from a space purely based on the interaction that you see in the space. Okay, so it includes a human as a part of the landscape, not just one external influence of a system. In case of species-centric, and species and its population strongly responds to the way resources are arranged. For example, if you're talking about elephant, if you're talking about tiger, if you're talking about Nilgiri tahr, so it has its own connection to certain habitat. So without those habitat, you can't find them. So you have the definition from the species perspective, and you start putting all other elements as a correlating elements. Okay. So basically, the resources anybody requires, it's arranged in space and time. So I think the space and time concept was not considered very well in the past. So ever since the landscape ecology emerged, so this aspect of space, in terms of the spatial pattern and the temporal characteristics have been incorporated. So I think this is a great milestone from a contemporary landscape ecologist. I remember very vividly even those people in the initial stages when they started looking at landscape ecology science to be really a science that we need to embrace it very strongly. They all became converts be it ornithologists, many of these names, like and John Beans is one of the famous ornithologists. So he became a landscape ecologist later. So this is the development in the recent past. I mean, maybe 2 to 3 decades we are talking about. And now we see this particular discipline to be the key driver for problem solving related to many of the things that we talk about, be it G20 discussions, we're talking about issues like One Health. What is One Health? The interlinkages between environment, health, public health, and animal health. But then, what is the science behind it? How do we even appreciate these interlinkages? So then you have to take some science as your background. If you look for the science, you will end up a landscape ecology as a science to give you the direction or the framework to appreciate One Health. It's a very popular theme that has been taken up now. I think this is another area many of you are traditional knowledge system experts. I think One Health is another area which is picking up globally. And, even India has started with One Health mission, a national One Health mission. So I think the traditional knowledge system will find its way. But landscape ecology, despite being a very, very, very important, the discourse, it's not developed long ago. Yeah. So here comes the one who takes the ownership. So when the landscape science started developing, we all thought that the Europeans started. I mean, although it was coined earlier, the European school started to be the pioneer. So they started talking about land-centric issues. So that's why they kind of started promoting. In fact, the Association of Landscape Ecology, the International Association, was actually established in the Netherlands in the 1980s. It was a society formed there. So you can imagine the time scale that we're talking about. Then Americans started looking more from a species-centric because, as you all know, between this European and an American model, the Europeans actually kind of modified the system so much. Today, they may be a great environmentalist. They may be talking about all sorts of environmental concerns. But if you look at the history, so I think Europeans have actually kind of devastated many of the native forest. They have kind of modified system. They've recreated. I mean, it is that footprint is still even in India and Southeast Asia. But fortunately, Americans, America started establishing much later, the natural system remained. So only the aborigines were there. So therefore, conserved areas were more. So the thought process, by the time it's evolved, so the American school had more of a conservation centric, whereas European had more development centric. But here comes the catch. So despite all this, where is our model? Are we just adopting a European model or American model? Because in India, we have long tradition. I mean, many of us know that. But we cannot simply borrow, even though many of the time we tend to borrow from the Western world. But I think we have a very strong, our Indianness. There is an Indian concept. So if you look at it, I mean, as a novice landscape ecologist, when I started, maybe way back in 2002, when I got introduced to landscape ecology, we used to get carried away by these kind of narratives from European or American school. So when I come back to India and start looking at, okay, where do I apply this? Is it an European model or it's an American model? But India has actually, this is kind of, you start discovering yourself that how ignorant we are. But I think Indian concept has been long before, and there's a lot more there. In fact, but India has got both the concept because we're talking about conserved areas, inviolate areas. There are large modified areas, but you cannot apply any of them. So this is how you started understanding a landscape. But a person who come from the state of Tamil Nadu and the same region, I mean, at least the Delta region where we talk about so much of land management, even from the historical time, I think when people talk about land management now, I think you can go back to those Chola dynasties when the water management was probably the best. And the way things developed, even the testimony is even the Aniket, the dam is still there. And even those, the channels that were done. So, but that was kind of indicator. But then before that, people started appreciating how things were. This is where I started looking at many literature. Then I knew now this the Sangam literature was something was very useful to me. But I just wanted to kind of quote this before I move on to this the Sangam literature. Why I wanted to quote this? Because people have as if they discovered something. See, this is a famous scientist, John Means, is an ornithologist and landscape ecologist. He states that emergence of landscape ecology as a discipline has catalyzed a shift in paradigms among ecologists, natural resource managers, and land use planners. Having now seen the phases of spatial pattern scale, we can never go back to the old way of viewing things. So this is where I want you to take note of. If this is the case, but then how did we forget all those things that existed in the past? I mean, the kind of modern education that we had, unfortunately, making us to go more and more away from the traditional system. But thankfully, it's not too late. Now we realize that I think it's time to come back and then go into our even the education thought process into old system. So when I say we cannot go back to the old way of viewing things, so what if somebody reads gets more about the Sangam literature? Maybe this is an experience that I have. I think many of you may have your own traditional knowledge system, and maybe even start appreciating more than we know actually what exactly happens. Sangam literature, there's been, you know, that it's all written several years ago with several experts. Many of us don't even know who those people were. I mean, it's all, I mean, many of them are documented, many are still being documented, but there are certain things, the collections are there. Okay. So among the collections, including Tirukural, that many of you know, very familiar with, the Tinagals, Ainthinaigal is one of the literature. It talks about landscapes. It's a Tamil landscapes. Okay. So I don't know, many of you, if you're from Tamil Nadu or reading a Sangam literature, would know they have actually described the landscape so beautifully. It's known as a Tinaigal. A Tinaigal is basically landscapes. So the 5 landscapes have been defined. It is written very beautifully. I mean, I'll tell you, the Tinaigal has got 2 descriptions. There is Aham, there's a Puram. Aham is more of a internal, the feelings. It's an expressions about those narratives. The Puram is the description of the landscape. So it has got Aham and Puram, but then overall, if you look at it, there are 5 Tenaigals. So like it's generally said, even if you go to any of the schools in Tamil Nadu, this is very well taught. But that time we never even realized that, there's a strong subject area that one can dwell into. So maybe I'm going to take this journey now, henceforth, looking deeper into this, the literature and its applicability, and connecting this historical landscape science to, or landscape ecology, landscape perception to contemporary land management. Kurunji, Mullai, Marudam, Neidal, Palai. These are the 5 terms used. Kurunji is area talks about mountain and mountain like landscapes. Mullai is forest and surrounds. Okay, it's basically talks about this and its surrounds. So similarly, when I say Kurunji, I'm talking about mountain and its surrounds. Forest and its surrounds is Mullai. Marudam is agriculture and its surrounds. Okay. Neidal is a coastal and sea, and Palai is a airy landscape. Okay. So I can challenge any of this biogeographer, any of the land management system. Could we describe simply this one? And now we are talking about, I'll also give you an example of how the biogeographic classification be done, based on which, how we are also advancing our conservation. The entire India's protected area management is being done with that as a basis. Biogeographic zone is our basis for declaring a protected area. What species, what biodiversity we need to protect. So this is how the landscape have been described. Okay. If you look at the details of it, I mean, as I said, I talked about 2 things, about the romantic description and also what the landscape contains. It symbolizes love and union. It's basically, it's a story goes between, the lover is a family, but it also takes on to the relationship, human relationship is where the literature captures. Okay. It talks about various flora. I mean, you will be surprised to know in this literature, it really talks about different flora and fauna which is available that landscape. It also talks about the cultural significance, and also talking about what is the kind of livelihood people live in the landscape. Okay. So now we wanted to go, we are looking at a socioeconomic survey, we're talking about all of them. So this has been captured very eloquently that, this is what it is, this means this, and this has got these kind of fauna flora, and these are cultural significance, and including taking examples of some of the gods and what people are doing in the landscape. And similarly, talking about the forest, it talks about the weight and patience, and what kind of fauna flora in the landscape, dense forests, pastoral lands, and talks about kind of husbandry practices in the landscape. Who are the people who are involved, and the fertile lands. There's the Marudam, that's your agriculture areas. It's actually typically talking about the fertile protective land. Say dynamicism of human relationship. It talks because this is an area where the humans started getting into resource competition. So it talks about it. And then we talked about agriculture lands, crops, and again talking about what kind of cultural significance. It goes on like that to Naidal. It talks about coastal and marine system, and also to the people might ask you, where is a maybe desert kind of thing, because when I say Pala, it always comes to mind it's a desert. It is not desert, it's an arid system. If you can look at yourself from coastal to the mountain, you would see a belt which is a dry belt. So that represents the dry system. So even then, even though people stayed in small places, maybe because they've been a traveler, whatever, or since it was a collection of knowledge, they were able to appreciate this, and the description has been very beautiful. And this is how I see. I mean, if you want to educate people now, we talk about so much of issues and conservation in India. Even we are firefighting in many cases. We are also having a human wildlife conflict issues. But then I think we have to have some kind of linkages as to how people have been able to live in the past, and even to define land management through this prism of the natural narratives would be much more effective. Now, let me just take back to you from the Sangam to the contemporary. Biogeography is a definition in which you look at the whole elements of geosystem. You're putting it to sometime you put the zoological elements, no, and also the botanical elements, and then identify they represented different areas. You talk about Arctic, Palearctic, and Oriental different. So even in India, when you talk about Indian the whole geography, many of these animals and plants, including us, I mean, we all know that we all come from a different parts of the globe. So the influx of animal and plants and human have come from different realms. So India is supposed to have benefited from Palearctic and Oriental, and also from European. So therefore, the faunal floral complexities India has got a lot of mixes. Okay, because even if you look at historically the evolution of the human and wildlife in talking about the Gondwana Islands, and started moving to us. So we have those mixes. But based on which, now people started looking at, they want to look at representativeness. So therefore, we can conserve wildlife. Okay. So conserve wildlife means enable things for betterment of us. It's like it's enabling quality of life for people. So this biogeographic classification is moved on with the definition of ecological character and significance. In India, there's an excellent, in fact, 1980s when Wildlife Institute was established, this was one of the first thing that was done, is to classify India into different biogeographic zones. So it was an innovative expert-based approach in which people went around and consulted, looked at, that time there was no big GIS or something like that. There's no aerial database to support. It started earlier, and they focused on the patterns, the spatial pattern of the different geo units, the fauna, flora, and the cultural significances. So we claim this to be the best document, and we still use it. And many of these protected areas actually defined or identified based on these representativeness. In fact, you see this, the 10 biogeographic zones have been classified, and they have been classified based on these certain zonal philosophy. So there is a bigger zone, it has got large units. Then we have a provinces, which comes a little lower than the province. And there are sub-regions and then biome. So this is a classification system that kind of allowed us to appreciate the country and also appreciate the need for conservation. So this kind of a framework allowed us to do the gap analysis. So now you can see when I talk about biogeographic zone, I'm talking in large area, for example, the Himalayas, the Western Ghats. When I'm talking about biotic provinces, I'm talking subunits within the, say, Western Ghats. I would say I talk about Southern Western Ghats, Northern Western Ghats, maybe Palkat Gap can be one. Okay. So, but then these two units have been somehow mapped. We know what they're talking about. But other subunits like subdivisions, the region, we call it a land region or a landscape, is a tertiary unit, subunit of those two. It talks about certain specific units. We talk about Aravalli Mountains, let's say. We talk about, say, Palni Hills here. No? We are talking about Travancore. I mean, it can be a very, very specific basic units we can be talking about. But they all had, see, many of us know they all had very excellent history. But I think recreating them, I think, or learning more and doing now some kind of reconstructing would be, I think, a lot more beneficial to the humanity is what I started realizing more and more when I see this. In fact, that my future journey is more or less is kind of decided on this path. And biome is where the final unit in which we all live. It could be fauna, flora, and all of them. So the subdivision concept that I already talked about, and this is what we have now in India. So these are the 10 biogeographic zones that's been classified based on whatever criteria that I talked about previously. And there are 27 provinces. They've been subdivided. But now, if I explain to you from the Sangam concept, I think they've gone even finer and they captured both. So that's the beauty of it. You could scale up, you can scale down. So even with the descriptive narrative that people were able to present in the past. So as I said, all of our protect areas, or these are the dots that you're seeing, these are the protect area network in India. So many of you are not very familiar. You would know that India has got large number of network protect areas which are legally notified, and it has got a great ecological significance. So because of which we are considered the leader of conservation globally. We are appreciated very much because through this biogeographic classification, so this network of protect areas has been established increasingly. If I can show you the statistics, this is how it has started. From 1970, we're starting with the 5 national parks and 59 wildlife sanctuaries and 19 conservation reserves. And we have now almost 1,000 protect areas, if I can put together all of them. So India is aiming to, I mean, already they claim that we have more than 25% protect areas under protect area. So including the legally notified national park sanctuaries and also the protected forests and reserve forests. So this is how the contemporary, the biogeography works around, okay? So, but then when I go to this, taking the concept to Kaveri Basin, because that's where I think when you look at the whole Sangam evolution, it's because Madurai was the base and then people are able to look at the entire region. So the Kaveri, of course, it's an interesting place because it's considered, the Dakshin Ganga. It's a Ganga of South India because it's one of the biggest and sacred river, but runs through with so much of geographical units and has got several religious hotspots. And it's also a place where there's the irrigation management system by Chola Empire developed. There's a lot of things to appreciate in this land system because when we start hearing this whole the Kaveri issue between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, but when you go deeper, I actually see a solution is already there. It's just if each of us manage the landscape in a manner which has got both culturally or also ecologically aligned, I think we'll have a lot of solutions. Yeah. So this is just a map to give you what exactly they've been able to now, contemporary science has been able to provide. It's a forest cover. And we're talking about the land uses that have changed. This is just simply talking about how the land use change. But this is the biogeographic zone classification here. If I to put this, I mean, they don't come even very close to what the literature of Sangam has been able to describe. I mean, it's very broad, because it's gone from an expert opinion. It is still not complete, but then if you look at very broadly in Tinai concept, and you can actually take them through this. Maybe there could be some variation. This was something that I picked up from the literature, but this definition is very clear. And I think if you start walking from the coastal to mountain, you will start encountering all those. Even without any GIS or anything, if somebody just keep walking, they will be able to appreciate, oh, this is the land that in Sangam literature talks about, Fine Thinagal. Yeah. So this is what I'm going into the last part of my talk. I know I wanted to give more time for discussion. So this whole explanation about the landscape, you can see, I want to bring you back to the Sangam literature. I mean, when I Sangam literature, I'm not talking about the entire Sangam literature. It's a very small part of Sangam literature which talks about Tinaigal, the Ain Tinaigal it is called, very famously known as Ain Tinaigal. They have, there was Ain Tinai, Aimbadu, Ain Tinai, Ezhuvathu. These are some of the terms given for the poems that's written around each of them. Okay, so they have each of the Tinaigal has got set of poems. Some one set has got 10, the other set has got 12. Okay, so people are able to infer so much from this. So what I'm presenting is a very broad narrative that we could grasp from it. If somebody can go deeper, I think they will start enjoying the way it is written and what kind of details that we can look at it. So let us go back here into this landscape. So Kurunji is again, as I said, is a mountain landscape. So you have mountain landscapes defined very nicely. We know the Kurunji is again a flower, but Nilgiri tar is a symbol of that mountain system. So between Karnataka and Kerala and Tamil Nadu, I think the whole mountain system, the Shola forest, which is on the top of the Western Ghats, is typically the mountain areas. Okay, but then the Shola represents the Nilgiri tar. Then if you come down, you'll start seeing elephant, tiger, some of bamboos, and Kurunji is very famous. The Strobilanthus, they have a mass flowering. Everybody goes there to see the mass flowering. So this is all there. I'm not just picking up. These are again available in those literature. So this is the name that we are giving is the contemporary name, but in terms of the description, it is all there. So what people do there is also the occupation. Honey gathering is an occupation. People, even today, we see the remnants of people, the tribal communities who are very powerful. Even they are all still living, and you can kind of relate this. It doesn't look like a 2,000-year-old literature. It look as if somebody's written. Like when people talk about Tirukkural as a literature that's timeless, even this one, the description of it looks like it's written forever. So just that we failed to notice it, or maybe just passed. Maybe there's only we left it to only a Tamil literature, other people just to see and appreciate, enjoy the beauty of the literature. But I think for a scientist like us, we have a lot of lessons to learn from this. And this is Akrunchi. Now is Mullai. So forest and pasture landscape. So when we talk about forest and pasture landscape, we have species like sambar deer and cheetal, and there's the beautiful flower cassia fistula. Many of us use it. I know, I don't know how many of you know this. Whenever you harvest mango, okay, if people wanted to get a mango in a very yellow color and very nice smell, and they plug the leaves of the cassia fistula when they just store it to ripe. So I don't know how many people, we have done it in our own home. So you know that how people have had great knowledge. Now people are putting a lot of other chemicals and other things. They're giving us, contaminated and tasteless fruits. But people, when they started using natural areas very sustainably, they've been able to produce better and they live better. I think the traditional system, I think people like me who are speaking complete from other stem, many of you might be very surprising, but if I can change, being a very hardcore ecology-based scientist, I think there's a big room for many of us to kind of start appreciating the traditional knowledge system. So the beauty of monosperma is again, is an indicator. So that's what, it's very important. Now contemporary scientists will tell you, if you see more beauty of monosperma means that area has got a lot of grazing impact. Okay, so that's what the pasture, these indicators are very well written. So it's there, the livestock grazing. There is also the beauty of monosperma. This is Palash, it's called in north, but we don't know what you call there in south, but it's all there. So similarly, flowers. So jasminum. So jasminum is a flower representing the landscape. So these are some of these indicative species that you can see in each of the landscape. And again, occupation, when you say husbandry practices, has been the occupation of those people. So when you talk about land-people relationship, what we can do in a different land is explained. But now we tend to force occupation, even land which is not able to receive or cannot receive it. So we think, I don't want to sound critical of engineers. So I always, because I teach a lot of engineers and I used to joke with them, engineers think that they can change the world. Engineers can do anything they want. So they can, create tunnels, they can go to Mars, it's all fine. So we don't say that, the ability is always there. We need to accept the nature is a superpower. So we can only do what the nature can allow us. We cannot do things which is not palatable to our land system. So when you look at these kind of relations that is explained, in the mountain system, You cannot do grazing. It's only you can sustainably harvest. But in this forest system with a pasture land, we can do husbandry practices. So if you are promoting some of this, long-term sustainability opportunities, this is how we should appreciate, and we have a lot of lessons coming from this literature. And Marudam, okay, it sounds very good when you say talk about Marudam. It's like this is a agriculture landscape. But then when you say agriculture landscape, we're not talking about completely modified landscapes. We have buffaloes. We look at many of those water birds. They're all there. Okay, so through that, people started kind of modifying the poultry industries. That's where how domestication process started. So if you look at the history of domestication, people will trace even the country chicken that we have. It is a big debate happening. How it happened? Who domesticated it? It's a Chinese or Indian? So there is a whole process of genome that has happened through red jungle fowl. Red jungle fowl considered to be the ancestor for all our domestic chicken. So it's $1 billion industry. Okay, but people started domesticating in certain landscapes. It cannot be done domesticating them somewhere. This is an interface landscape. Okay, so that is how people started changing the landscape. So that's, as much as we talked about Chola's dynasty, I think Chola dynasty was also responsible for modifying a lot of those land into agriculture. But I think the food security was something that we talk about in 70s. I think the food security was even thought long ago, and these modification of forest system to interface system to agriculture and creating a large network of irrigation channel was possible at that point in time. So you can talk about fauna, flora. Again, cultivation is the major occupation there. So in a cultivated land, if you just bring industries, what happens? So this is what, so many of this engineering solution that we start thinking today, fortunately in Tamil Nadu with a lot of protests, Kaveri Delta become a protected areas. I mean, it's a kind of, that is how we need to look at these land units, protect them for that particular cause it is meant for. We cannot change those land systems. So in fact, every time when people talk about, okay, we have so much problem about climate change, we have so much problem about pollution, we have so much problem about other things, even poverty, people ask solution. You can trace back, is a land use policy. Land use policy is the solution. Unfortunately, we do not have in India. That is how it's with the vested interest, people modify the land. And later we suffer. We talk about climate change. Who caused it? It's us, because we use the land in a wrong way, not meant for those purposes, because certain system can allow only that much. Yeah. And neither. Of course, this is a most abused land system now. So people talking about green carbon, blue carbon, and so many other things. But you can look at how they've been described. So different fauna, flora, they are like even Brahmini kites. I mean, maybe the names that even start looking at it, avian predators, ground predator, and again, the occupation being fishing, and many of these plants, animals, they're all being described nicely. And finally, this is an arid landscape. I mean, I can clearly see if somebody goes to, between in Tanjavur district, even the places like Trichy and all the way towards coast, they will be able to see some dry zone. Okay, so that's an arid zone. So it can be a national scale. You can apply them into a desert area. Okay, where the life is a nomadic life system. So people used to just move from one place to other. So all this, even if you look at Tamil Nadu, the southern Tamil Nadu part, always known to be very dry zone. Many people have actually been migrated or nomadic life, they've said. So even today, we'll see some evidence of those. Even the shepherds and others that are coming, they actually come from a different part. They just move around. So that is a lifestyle they have. Okay. So plants and species like vulture, they are known to this living, because why vulture there? Because it's an open system. Vultures can actually see. Now, because we modified so much this system, but they now started taking refuge in the forest area. I can tell you, we've been studying vultures in central India. Vultures use the protected forest, but then they move a large distance of foraging. So they go to open areas because they can only see food and then scavenge. So animal like wolf and jackal, all of them have lived in those landscapes. So it is not, when people talk about, even in sometime when we write about this, they call it as a wasteland, arid and a wasteland. There is no term called wasteland. There's no land that is waste. And the terminology itself is very wrong. So it's a land, it's unique for that particular system. So wolf and jackal and many of them live in those landscapes. It might look very waste or arid, open for our eyes, but for ecological point of view, they are important system. So this is how I was able to appreciate these linkages, and the more I get to realize, in fact, I'll be looking towards working with some experts and taking this journey forward. I hope to really reconstruct, the historical landscape understanding to the contemporary, and promote the idea of the sustainable development through now nature culture linkages under the larger traditional knowledge framework. So finally, the nature-based solution we often talk, but to me it's nature and culture-based solutions, because many of the things that system that is allows us to look at it, these three pillars: an economic pillar, an ecological pillar, and social pillar. And so other idea that I've been looking at is to see how the circular economy concept can be integrated into this knowledge system. Therefore, we can kind of take this to a next step. So it's not that we're only talking about tradition, we're also talking about the futuristic point of view, bringing people on board to get into the public-private partnership, creating more employment, and also present this idea that this landscape can be used for these things, and there's a new job opportunity that can be created. This is an idea that is emerging. So what I'm trying to conclude here is, while we have a large understanding of the traditional system and incorporating whatever that aspirations are now, I think we will be able to strike a very good win-win situation. So I personally, I was really happy that I could participate in this, partly because this is an area that I think we all needed to promote more aggressively than taking only the one side of the story. So thank you so much for this attention. I'll be happy to take any questions. And in fact, I'll like to learn more from many of you. Thank you.
The floor is open. If there are any questions, they can be asked now. I would like to introduce two eminent people in our gathering. One is Professor Balagopal T.S. Prabhu.
Namaskar, sir.
He's a very eminent engineer. He was heading our department, and he's basically made traditional knowledge in terms of architecture and engineering accessible to all. So he's published commentaries on traditional texts, which is very widely followed.
Yeah, I look forward to meeting and discussing with him.
Then we have Dr. Kshama Puntambekar. She is from SPA Bhopal.
Okay, Bhopal.
He is working on Indian knowledge systems in town planning.
Oh, I see. So I'm going to Bhopal, ma'am, today. So I'll be spending in Satpura Tiger Reserve for another 10 days.
Okay.
I work very closely in Madhya Pradesh. I've been working in Panna Tiger Reserve for the last 10 years. So we are actually putting in place an integrated landscape management plan. In fact, I'll be very happy to discuss with you and involve you, because we are now going to implement this the landscape plan. I'm planning to create the nature culture, the circuit for tourism. So yeah, thank you.
We have a landscape department in our institute. Maybe it would be the right. I
Sure.
hope to meet Durga Prasad Srivastava there, DP Srivastava. He's working on human-animal conflict
Yes,
in Bhopal. So, okay.
I know him.
Yeah.
He knows me too.
Yeah.
So we would like to get some more reference text related to Sangam literature, where we could study more about.
So this is one area. There's a lot of literature. So in fact, there's all collections are available, and there's one interesting website I discovered. It has got the whole collections. I can actually share. So in fact, I've been looking for, as I said in my talk, I'm actually, I don't know, I should declare here, but I'm thinking of taking up a separate study and project on this. When I'm trying to look at the literature, all of them are available in different compilations. Okay, so there's a Padanit, but so in fact, this one of the gentlemen is actually went about brought these literature. There's something called sangamtamil.com. Okay, so that gives the indication. But then from my school days now, I keep collecting some of the books, Agananur, Purananuru, all this Tolkappiyam and all. But I think we need to see a sequence. This is where that collection is available.
Thank you.
Just one question. Have you attempted classifying the landscape or the land at a national level, perhaps, according to the features specified in Sangam literature?
No, that's my project. So in fact, that's what I was going to say, because we started discovering, in fact, after this Bajra zone, we saw the map for the zone and province, but we don't even have maps for land region. But I know in Kerala, there was one attempt long ago to a landscape perspective plan, which was more from an environmental perspective. But when I started looking at the classification, we attempted for Central India. So in fact, Vandana sitting there, and but then that is again part of the story. But when I was looking at a solution, I think this is where I'm going to start now, thinking of doing that. Yeah, maybe I'll like to collaborate with some of you.
That's really going to be very enlightening once
Yeah,
that
definitely.
classification is spatial classification is done.
Thank you.
Good.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'll probably,
Just one more question.
okay.
It's not basically a question. So I'm Amrita. I'm working on this traditional knowledge aspect, and my village or my location is actually Madhya Pradesh. Yeah.
Where
So
in Madhya Pradesh?
in Alirajpur district,
No.
Katiwada, that's the
Okay.
place. So I would like to have a discussion with you. So
Sure.
if that was the thing.
So anytime. Yeah, madam is also there. I think it'll be great to connect. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I guess if there are no more questions, we'll close the session. I'm like immensely grateful to you for taking the time and talking to us and taking us through this amazing journey and opening up the possibilities of what can be done with traditional knowledge and integrating it with landscape ecology. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.